My next guest has been watching this story very closely. Sue Turton is a journalist with Al-Jazeera, a colleague and friend of Mohamed Fahmy. And like Fahmy, she was accused of aiding terrorists and spreading false news. But she managed to escape Egypt before she could be arrested and was sentenced to 10 years in absentia. She joins me now from Doha, Qatar. Sue, thanks so much for being with us. So the first thing I want to ask you is, what was your reaction when you heard the news about this new retrial date for this week?
Great disappointment, to be honest, Jennifer. To be honest, when we were hearing such positivity coming out of the Canadian government with this word imminent, which I think will really bite back at them now for saying it, that they believed that Mohamed Fahmy was on the brink of being deported, much like Peter Greste was to Australia. And then we've watched every day, and I have to say Mohamed Fahmy has woken up every day hoping that that was the last day of his imprisonment, and his hopes have been so dashed now. He's now saying that he believes this is it. He can't now be deported. He believes that he's sort of part of the court's jurisdiction now. We're still clinging on to the idea that the Canadian government can go back again, can say to the Egyptians again, there must be a way around this stalled deportation. We must be able to get him out of his incarceration before the retrial this coming Thursday. So
what are your biggest fears then? You're hoping he will get out before that retrial. If that cannot happen, what's your biggest fear around that?
The biggest fear is that we go back into a trial scenario within the Egyptian justice system. That will happen on Thursday, at least the first day of that trial will happen. We aren't expecting it to be cut and dried on Thursday. We're expecting it to roll into subsequent days. We don't know whether that'll be gaps of weeks that happened in the first trial, or though possibly after the weekend, which is obviously Friday and a Saturday in Egypt, then it will kick off again on Sunday. We don't know, but we are most worried that the same attitude to the evidence, the same reaction to the fact that they didn't put anything of any worth, really, of any evidence at all against us, and to prove the conviction that they found us guilty of us in the first trial, in the retrial, we are really fearing that won't be the case. Now, hopefully the retrial will recognise clearly the appeal court recognised, that this conviction was not trustworthy, it was very shaky and really had to be looked at again. And all of us are hoping when the judge sees the sort of evidence that the prosecution brought forward, they can't bring any different evidence, it has to be the same evidence in the Egyptian court system, then they will recognise there was no case to answer. But it's a fear that this is the same justice system that convicted us all in the first place.
What is particularly puzzling about all of this is, of course, the fact that that third journalist who was imprisoned, Peter Greste, was released last week. And we had heard that word imminent. As you mentioned, so many people had been hanging their hopes on that word. What do you think happened here then?
Well, all the clues really coming out of the prison and out of the lawyers are that there was some sort of stall. Now, there was question mark over the whole decision that Mohamed Fahmy made to renounce his citizenship. He has said now very, very pointedly, I did not want to do that. I am an Egyptian. My parents are very proud Egyptians, and he comes from a sort of a patriotic background. But he was told before the appeal in January that if he didn't renounce his citizenship, then there would be no hope of his release on this deportation situation. So with a heavy heart, he renounced it. And we moved forward thinking that that indeed had been the thing that had turned the Egyptians' mind, and they'd said, OK, he's now a full Canadian citizen, he should be released. It seems there was a stall somewhere. Now, whether it was the terms that the Egyptians were insisting on, or whether the Canadians backed down from what they had initially promised, we have no clue. From the statement you just read out earlier, it seems that they are still pushing for that imminent release. But then what is it that stalled? Tell us what it is that stalled the situation. Tell us who put the knife into this deal and said it's not going to happen. We really like to know, because at the moment it looks like the Canadians just couldn't do what the Australian government did, and we'd like to know why that is.
Talk to me a little more about renouncing the Egyptian citizenship. As you say, that had been seen as a hopeful sign. Are you worried now that that could come back to actually hurt Mohamed Fahmy in this retrial scenario?
Well, we know there was quite a backlash within the Egyptian media when it came out that indeed he had renounced his citizenship, and that Baha Mohamed, obviously the third member of the team, who is still in prison, and I know he has just an Egyptian passport, he doesn't have dual citizenship. It seemed like Mohamed Fahmy was going to be released, and then just the Egyptian was left to kind of carry the can, if you like, the one that was left to go into that retrial. And that, I suppose, didn't look good. The fact that the two foreigners were released and just the Egyptian was the one still incarcerated. And maybe that is the thing that has been the reason that this has now stalled. In a way, possibly that's a bad thing, because that means we now have two Egyptians going into the courtroom. Maybe that's a bad thing, because they won't be seen by the rest of the Western world as worth covering, worth watching, worth keeping in the spotlight. But I've had assurances from my colleagues from other channels, they will be there, they will be watching exactly what happens in that courtroom, and they won't look away. And in a very small part of what's happened in the last 24 hours, at least Mohamed Fahmy now will be standing next to Baha Mohamed in that cage. At least he has somebody to lean on, somebody from Al-Jazeera, somebody that he can go through this situation with together, rather than him being left on his own.
Well, you talk about his support network. I want to ask you about his lawyer, human rights lawyer Amal Clooney, with word now that she says she is going to Egypt this week, that she has requested a meeting with the Egyptian president himself. What do you think she might be able to do at this point?
I think the one thing she does do is make a lot of headlines, and I think that includes the Egyptian media as well as the international media. They all know who she is. She's going to make a lot of noise. So even if she turns up in Cairo and the president won't see her, she will be diverting attention away from everything else that they're pushing for. We know at the moment there's an economic forum coming up. We know the Egyptians want good headlines around the world and domestically. They want to be showing that their economy is getting back on track, that tourism is getting back on track. And the one thing Amal Clooney does is point back to the court case, point back to the fact that there are now two journalists still incarcerated for Al-Jazeera inside those prison walls. And she questions the whole dedication of the Egyptian government to human rights. So that is, I think, a great positive for our case. She is willing to go to Cairo. She is willing to try and rattle some cages, if you like, and get that spotlight still focusing on the guys. She's promised to come away with Mohamed Fahmy when she leaves Cairo. Let's just hope she manages to do that.
I can hear the exasperation in your voice. And, you know, you're so close to this story, Sue. The fact that you were sentenced in absentia could very well be you with those two being retried on Thursday. I wonder what this does to you and your Al Jazeera colleagues as you watch what must be a heart-wrenching series of events play out.
It's terrible. You know, the guys still incarcerated are not just colleagues, they're really good friends of mine. I've worked with them for months in Cairo. And, you know, I know how solid they are as journalists and solid they are as guys. They're really, especially Baha, much a family man, a very sensitive guy. You know, he has a 6-month-old baby that his wife is having to bring up without him, and 2 young children. And Mohamed Fahmy, dedicated to his job, dedicated to Egypt, really, has always tried to put forward what is going on in Egypt and any of the outlets that he's worked for. So I watch these two. You know, I feel Mohamed Fahmy's exasperation over the last few days, and how every day he's thought, this is the last one, I am coming out. He's so excited at the prospect of being able to walk down the street in Toronto. He even dreamed of it the other night. He actually dreamed he was free and was in Toronto. You know, he's having to calm all that down again, and now he's facing another courtroom, another day in a cage in an Egyptian court. So yes, we feel desperately for them, you know, and whatever we're going through with our convictions, it just doesn't matter compared to what they're having to put up with. Let's just get them out. Let's just get Egypt to recognise that they were just normal journalists doing the job that so many journalists do for every channel, including yours, all over the world. Release them and let's put this thing behind us.